Hey, everybody, welcome back once again to Retro Wrestling with Gene Jackson. And we got another great interview lined up for you this week. This week, I'm going to get a chance to sit down and conversate with a fellow podcaster, which is always fun. And this guy is a guy who I really enjoy his interviews. He manages to find some people that in the back of my head I thought, man, I'd love to talk to that guy, but I don't know how to find them. And somehow Rick finds them, and I really enjoy it. So let's get him on here right now, and let's talk about some of these interviews he's been doing and what all he's got going on right now. Welcome, my guest, Rick Del Santo. Rick, how you doing, man?
I'm great. Thank you for having me here at this show. I love listening to the bulk of your shows.
Yeah, it's getting to be too many of them, but I'm trying to I'm trying to sort that out and whittle it down to the necessary shows. But man, I tell you what, I really like I was saying in the intro there. You interview some mainstream people, but you also manage to find some people, and I really love interviews with people who haven't done 1,000 podcasts and 1,000 shoot interviews, and we already know what they're going to say before they say it. And interviews like Vladimir Koloff and Richard Sartain. I love the Jimmy Powell interview. Is tremendous, and of course, most recently, Joe Malenko. But before we get into all that, let's just kind of back up a few steps and talk about your fandom of professional wrestling, kind of where that starts, and what your first memories are of what hooked you with professional wrestling.
Honestly, I didn't get completely hooked right away, but I started, I guess, in 1984 during the big boom, the first big boom, I guess you could say, of the somewhat modern era. My cousin was watching wrestling, and I said, "What the hell is this?" And it was Roddy Piper in the ring, and ever since then, I was watching. And I would say I'd watch moderately on like Saturday mornings. And it wasn't until like 4 years later I went to my first live show, 1988 at the New Haven Coliseum, New Haven, Connecticut. Became instantly obsessed with wrestling from there on in, starting with my first live show. I guess it was a different experience, if you will. I got to see Andre the Giant challenge Randy Savage for the world title. He had just won it, I think, probably a month earlier at WrestleMania. So, it was kind of it was just a very really intense experience, and then I couldn't get enough of it at that point. After that.
They'd always say on TV, you got to come experience it live. And I thought, that's just a hook. But I was kind of the same way. Like, I started watching wrestling around that same time. My dad would have it on, and I'd be in and out of the room. And in 1987, no, 80, late 86, I grew up in North Mississippi. So we went to a Continental show in Columbus, Mississippi. And the Bullet was in the main event. You had the Nightmares, you had Adrian Street, and all these folks. And man, once we went and saw it live, I was absolutely hooked, and I got to go see some Memphis shows live. And yeah, man, there's something about being there in the midst of it and experiencing the crowd and seeing it up close and personal. I was like you, I was all in. And anytime wrestling was on, if I knew about it, I was watching it. If there was a magazine I could get my hands on it, I was buying it. I studied this stuff and obsessed over it, as my mother would say. I can't tell you how many times as a kid my mom would say, "There's more to life than wrestling, Gene. You can't live your whole life around wrestling," because I would plan my Saturdays before we got a VCR. We can leave after the morning the NWA show, but we got to be back for Memphis at 10, and then we can leave after Memphis, but we got to be back at 5:05 for. um,
There was a point I was so obsessed with it, I got all my magazines taken away, because I wasn't concentrating enough in school or any of that stuff. I just, when I just started discovering things outside of like WWF and stuff like that, it was like World Class was on every day after school on ESPN.
yes.
So, with the Legends of World Class, and that opened me up to World Class. And of course, I was reading the magazines, and I would make sure that I'd be home by 4, no messing around after school. I was in probably like junior high to high school, like around that time period. Made sure I was home and made sure that I was watching Legends of World Class. And then sometimes, put AWA in there because if they were too up to date on their world class
Right.
programs, and that kind of opened me up to AWA. That was probably like 87, 88, I'm guessing,
Yeah.
and and then I would get, on occasion I would get the CWA program up here as well, the Memphis program
Yeah.
once in a while. It wasn't that often, but like I would catch it on like an off. The first time I think I seen it was like Gary Young, and when Gary Young was teaming with Cactus Jack at the time, and that show blew me away because I was like, I kind of became like really into Memphis wrestling at the time. I started tape trading, probably like 1990-ish, 89, 90, stuff like that. So, and then I would just, dude, like getting into like that's a whole nother world. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like you have access to so much at that point.
Yeah, I didn't get into tape trading until much later than that, and so I grew up, and like I say, where I was at, we could get Memphis Continental, obviously WWF, WCW, AWA, World Class. Couldn't get any of Watts' stuff from Mid South up through UWF, which is odd. Being in Mississippi, you think we would have, but it just didn't come on anything we had. Portland, Florida, all the different territories outside the South, and so I just grew up reading about them in magazines and occasionally catching pieces of something on a commercial tape that might come out every now and then. Like I remember
Right.
finding a video at Kmart. It was in a yellow box and it had the Fabulous Ones on the cover, and it had this. I think it was a barbed wire match between the Fabulous Ones and the Sheep Herders on there. And it was from Florida. And I was like, oh, this is that Florida wrestling I'm always hearing about. So I was fascinated. I watched it a whole bunch of times, but I've always been curious, and you kind of answered that a little bit right there, of like people who grew up on WWF, how they felt about when they finally saw some Memphis in this little studio, and if it came off as like rinky dink or hillbilly, or if it was cool. But it seems like you latched onto it pretty quickly.
The thing with things like that, I used to read about like a lot of the other wrestling in the magazines. You know what I mean? Like all the magazines used to just cover all different stuff, and so I was always curious about it. You know what I mean? And then when I finally got to see guys like Lawler and guys like that, it was awesome. He became one of my favorites. I got really into Southern wrestling once I was able to have access to it, and the tape trading and all that other stuff. Anything that was like kind of Southern, and I kind of just like changed my opinion on the WWF as a whole. Growing up in basically the heart of where the WWF is located in Connecticut,
Yeah.
I was the whole thing with like it just seemed more realistic. All that other like that Southern wrestling and stuff like that. People had real sounding names. They weren't coming out with snakes and birds, and the lighting was different, and there was blood and gore, and that really, really. I mean, I was just really like, to me, it was awesome. It was amazing to watch stuff like that.
My grandmother and one of my uncles lived in Memphis, so we would go visit them. And just the whole time I was there, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is where Memphis wrestling happens. And, we would drive by the Mid South Coliseum and later the Pyramid. And we'd go to the mall and I'd be like, oh my gosh, what if we run into like Jerry Lawler or somebody at the mall? That would be amazing. Uh,
Which wasn't entirely impossible either, from what I
it,
understand.
it
Like things
wasn't.
like
I
that.
found
Yeah.
out later that if I'd have went in the bookstore at the right time, downtown Bruno would be sitting on the floor reading a book, waiting to go to Jonesboro that night. Just never, the timing never worked out apparently.
Right.
But I don't know about
Right.
you, but like for me, like I had no concept of bad wrestling when I was a kid. If it was wrestling and I could watch it, I liked it. Like, you hear people go back now and
Yep.
go, oh, that sucked. I don't know why anybody watched it. I was like, if it was in a ring and I knew about it, I'm watching it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was also like I sat there every week and watched Herb Abrams UWF. No concept that it was bad. You know what I mean? I mean, now I could pick it apart and say there are some really good things about it. It's just not necessarily the concept as a whole. You know what I mean? So I sat there and watched it every week when it was on. I mean, I would get some Florida program up here on Sports Channel. I think it was IWA, IWF, or whatever.
Yeah.
Which Eddie Mansfield was running, and I really enjoyed that product. There was like, I had no concept of bad wrestling at that time either. It was like as a kid, like you're fully in on that whole thing. I watched Glow for crying out loud. So
Yeah, exactly. I was so like I didn't see UWF in real time. I would read
mhm,
about it in the magazines, and I would see like the big stars that were there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I could see this. And then later on, like so that was 1990. So by the time I was getting out of high school, I graduated in '95 and was going to college in late '95 in through '97. I remember going to Birmingham to the mall, and like Suncoast Video had a couple of those UWF commercial tapes that was out, like the best of Paul Orndorff and the lumberjack match, and I got that tape first, or those two tapes were like packaged together, and I got those, and eventually I ended up getting Beach Brawl and a couple of others, and by then I'm starting to get a little bit of all right, this isn't great, but just watching those compilation tapes, you still really couldn't get a real feel for it. And it was years later when I finally like traded for like the whole run of TV. And I
right.
start like, all right, I'm gonna start with episode 1. I'm just gonna work my way through, and it's like disqualification, double count out, double disqualification, double count out. I was like 6 episodes in. I'm like, geez, there hasn't been a finish in a single main event yet. Like, and I
Yep.
wasn't even
Yeah.
really smart by that point. I just kind of, I mean, I knew this wasn't legitimate, but I didn't know all the ins and outs and sit and debate booking. But even as just your basic fan, I was like, what is this shit where we don't get any kind of finish? Like, drove me crazy. And then years later, I dug into it, and me and a buddy of mine did a podcast about it where the intention was we were going to sit and watch every episode and review them each week. And after 12 episodes, my buddy Bob's like, I can't, Gene, I love you, but I can't do this. I'm going to blow my brains out, right? And so we stopped doing it. And then about 2 years later, a year later, I picked it up and started doing them by myself. And then it's like, well, it was fun when me and Bob was making fun of it, but now just sitting here talking about it by myself is even worse because what are you going to crack jokes with yourself? So that went on for a little while, and now that's kind of petered out too. I don't know, man. What were the highlights for you or the lowlights if as you watched it later on and like, holy cow, what were they thinking?
I really enjoyed that I got to watch guys like Bruno Sammartino on commentary,
Yeah.
John Tolos on commentary. David Sammartino was featured pretty heavily for a little bit there. That I kind of enjoyed that. Obviously, he gave a platform to Cactus Jack, which was still pretty early on in his career. He hadn't, been to become the mainstream star that he became in Mick Foley.
Yeah.
But I got to see guys like on the way down, Bob Orton, you know what I mean, and Brian Blair, who I did interview at one point. We talked about Herb a little bit,
Yeah.
and I got to, and then I got to see the Killer Bees reunited on one of their events, and I thought that was like kind of a highlight for me to watch at one point.
And that's
And,
where
and they were
Bob
doing like
Backlund's comeback started was UWF.
yeah, yeah, and I think wasn't he back in WWF probably like a year later? I think
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
or so. Yeah,
Yeah, he
and
was
there
in
was
there like June of. He was in UWF in June, and then like the following year, he shows up at the Royal Rumble in WWF. I think it was.
yeah,
Something
yep,
like that.
yeah,
Um.
yeah,
Yeah, I
something
mean
like
it
that.
had
Yeah.
its moments, but that Jonathan Plumbaum, I think is how you pronounce his name. I'm probably slaughtering it, but
Yeah,
he wrote
Plum
an
Bomb.
excellent.
Yeah,
He wrote an excellent book. I interviewed him once, and man, he wrote an excellent book about it. It's very interesting. I highly, if you've ever watched UWF or had any questions like, how in the world did this ever come together and happen? Read that book. He did his homework. He talked to a bunch of those guys. It's a really good book if you're interested in that sort of.
yeah. I had Jonathan on 2 times. Once while he was working on the book, and then once after the book got released. And he's a really good guy, and he was throwing ideas around about a second book about possibly the Savoldies, which I think that would have been a really good book if he actually did that.
So, if you had to nail down a favorite, like in, say, when you were a kid, when you started really, locking in on in '88, and then first several years, what would you say it was your favorite wrestling, and who was your favorite wrestler?
Honestly, my favorite wrestling, I know this is going to sound really weird, my favorite promotion of all time is this Foldies ICW, IWCCW. That I became, that was probably one of the first non-WWF shows that I discovered at my grandparents' house one day. I just saw, I don't even remember, I just remember the manager, the Duke, who was in there, and I believe, I don't remember his legit name. And I became obsessed with it. I tried to find it on my TV. They had a different cable system than we had, so I couldn't find it. That I became obsessed with but then eventually when I did get it, it was on a channel we didn't get. I had to convince my parents to order the channel so I could watch it. So that became my very first non-WWF and NWA, anything like that, show that I really, really, really got into outside of that kind of stuff. And I favorite wrestlers, I mean, obviously they give birth to guys like Tommy Dreamer that I would watch all the time. Tony Atlas, you know what I mean, was featured very heavily there, who I had to watch his heel turn on TV, which was just, to me, I was just like, that really shocked the hell out of me when he turned heel there. So that's probably my favorite wrestling of all time, and I still watch it now. I'm a subscriber to their network. And I was probably one of the first subscribers as soon as it launched, honestly. And it's probably and then the amount of footage that they've amassed over the last couple of years since they've launched that network. Yeah. I mean, it's just amazing. And you can catch some of my very earliest episodes up there as well, some of my earliest interviews, and my interview with Mario Savoldi. So if that's cheap plug, but so.
I need to check that out. It's been on my to-do list for a while, but I stay so busy. I only mostly watch things in preparation for interviews and such. So I don't get to sit and just watch stuff just to be watching it for enjoyment. And I really need to make time for that, because there's a lot of things like that I want to go check out that I just haven't. But if you say to me ICW or IWCCW, the first thing that comes to my mind is heel Tony Atlas. That's what really stands out to me. That was so much different than anything I had seen, because who even had a concept of heel Tony Atlas before that?
Yeah, I mean Mario went with it. I mean, I never thought that it happened. And some of that stuff, he started wearing different kinds of tights, you know what I mean, like the leopard print tights and stuff like that. It just did not look like the Tony Atlas you grew up watching in WWF in the earlier 80s.
No, not at all. Such a departure from the Black Superman we had seen out in Texas, and WWF Tony Atlas.
Yep.
That was a lot of fun. And people, go check it out. Go subscribe to the Savoldi's streaming network and check that out if you've never seen it, because it's a lot of fun. And there's a lot of other things. My buddy Doug Gilbert was a tag team with Dennis Condrey there, and it was short-lived, but it's one of the favorite things he did. He said, man, Dennis was so awesome, and he learned so much teaming with him that it was a really fun time. And then you had the brief, Paul Heyman was there briefly, and that was a little snippet of his career.
Which didn't last long, which I think, imagine the potential that could have happened with the Savoldi's. He could have saved them in a way. But it was after I guess there was no concept once Tony Rumble left. It just kind of tanked for a couple of years before. It was just, they were just running shows. You know what I mean? There's no real stories or anything like that. It was just running shows. But they still gave the platform to a lot of future talent that was kind of amazing. Guys like Bill DeMott was on there, and stuff like that. Guys like that.
Yeah, there were a lot of people that kicked their career off there, like you said, and most notably, maybe not most notably, but notably Tommy Dreamer for sure.
Yes, he worked there forever. Yeah.
So we've kind of established your fandom. So at what point do you decide that, hey, I need to find a way to do something with this, to take, because for me, I got in the business and wrestled for a bit. I managed and promoted and did different things. But after that I started getting on the backside of that, I thought, I have studied wrestling literally my entire life, and I got all this useless knowledge bouncing around in my head. What could I do with this to make it useful, to make it seem like all this hasn't been for nothing? And that led me to podcasting in 2007, and I've done a lot of different iterations of this over the years. But what kind of led you towards wrestling, and what was the first thing you did to get involved?
Well, Honestly, it's I started podcasting in 2019. A couple different names of the show, but I've changed it a couple times over the years. Um, what happened was I was kind of involved a little bit in community radio. I did some shows, music-based DJ type stuff with a friend of mine who was at the Connecticut School Broadcasting doing stuff for them, and then he brought me in, and abruptly after a few months that thing kind of ended, but I really liked it and I wanted to start something of my own. And probably a year later, which was 2019, and then I threw around ideas. How am I going to go about this and then I said, after a few weeks of thinking about it, I said, I'm going to start a podcast. And then it was not even wrestling related in my head at that time period. It wasn't until it was this one day I'm on my way to work. Me and my wife used to stop at this Cumberland Farms gas station every morning, a day of the week on the way into the office. This is prior to, now we work from home. So we used to go in every day, stop, get our coffee, get a soda or whatever, snacks for work and stuff like that. It was one day I'm coming from the soda cooler. I turn around and Paul Roma is standing at the counter. And I said, holy, you're Paul Roma. He said, yes, I am. And we sat there and talked for about a good 5 minutes. And he and Mario Mancini run a wrestling school and promotion up here in Connecticut, Paradise Alley Pro Wrestling. And he invited me to come to a show sometime. So I did the following week. At that point, they were running probably 3 shows from their school a month, and then one like bigger show, like at like a gymnasium or whatever. So I came down, I enjoyed it. I ran into somebody I knew there that had been involved in professional wrestling for like 30 years, the Guardian of Chaos, Big Daddy. And, we caught up and stuff like that. And then I went home and then I said, I'm going to start a wrestling podcast. I said, that's what I'm going to do. Because I had so much fun. And initially I was just sitting there a couple times a week recording 15-minute episodes, basically talking about the local wrestling scene, the NWA, and what was at that time Ring of Honor. You know what I mean? Because I didn't really talk much WWE at that time period. It wasn't until I had a co-host that we started talking about the entire world of professional wrestling. And, and then I started probably about a year or so in. That's when I started doing interviews and stuff like that. I had some, really good guests at that time period. And it just kind of brings me up now. I can't believe it's been almost 6 years basically that I've been doing this. And then I just eventually moved everything to YouTube, went from Apple, Spotify to YouTube. So I feel like YouTube's a better platform. People like to see what's going on.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I do a video version for YouTube, but still push the audio out to
Yeah.
all the different podcast platforms because I had so many people tell me I pondered going just to YouTube, and they're like, no, I'll listen on the way to work and I'll listen to it at the gym or whatever the case may be. But I think there's going to come a time where everything's going to have to be video, that people are just going to be like, I don't want to just listen to it.
Well, Spotify was doing it for, a while where you can just drop the video. And now I saw that suddenly Apple's going to start doing it now too. So, yeah.
Yep, that's the way of the future there. So, who was the first person, person where you were maybe a little nervous about the interview that you got a chance to interview on your podcast?
Wow, my first guest, I got to tell you, is kind of a person that's kind of made a bad name in the last year for themselves. And I feel kind of, to me, he was very nice. I had a great time. Met him in person like a couple years later, and we had a great conversation. But legally, he's gotten into some trouble. Duke the Dumpster Jersey was my first guest ever.
Okay, yeah.
He came off as a really good guy, at that time period, mind you. We had a great conversation regarding his career. And that was that. He treated me well. We kept in touch for a little while. And then after that, I had Barry Horowitz as my next guest,
Nice.
Probably like a month or so later. And that one, basically, I asked him to be, if he'd be a guest. And then he's like, well, where are you from? I said, New Haven, Connecticut. And he said, well, can I call you? And we had this phone conversation like a month before the podcast. So, because he was, he's always busy.
Yeah.
And he, once I said New Haven Coliseum, things changed, New Haven, Connecticut, rather. He was sharing stories about New Haven, being, wrestling guys like Paul Roma, at Jim Powers in the New Haven Coliseum, and everybody that taken part, because that was a major stop for the WWF for many, many years. And we had this great phone conversation. And then a month later, we did this really awesome podcast, which, I still every now and again go back and listen to that episode. I really enjoyed. I went through his entire career. There was things that I brought up in that thing that I remember watching, and I even did study for on YouTube, that he didn't even remember about. so that occasionally will happen,
Yeah, I mean, guys like him that they've wrestled for so long, so many different places. I mean, you can just imagine that it gets lost in there somewhere, and a lot of them, like, this happens with Tommy Rich almost weekly on the Dangerous Conversation show. Like, you'll unlock something in their brain that they haven't thought about in 20, 30 years or whatever, and then all this information comes pouring out. Oh yeah, I remember that. And this, and then afterwards, they'll be like, I haven't thought of that in 20 years, 30 years. I didn't even remember I did that, but now I do. And I don't know, it's really cool. Like, you feel good that you're bringing back memories for them, as long as it's good ones, and it usually is.
We'll return after these messages.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here. Lots of new stuff happening here at WrestleCopia. If you haven't checked out our website at WrestleCopia.com, it's a great way to keep up with the latest episodes of all of your favorite Copia programming, from the Wrestling Memory Grenade to Regional Wrestling with the Territory Talk, the Wrestling Stoop with the legendary Bob Roop, and of course all of those programs also available at your favorite podcast streaming platforms. And if you want to stay up to date with everything going on in the Copia world, all the latest news, random thoughts, fun videos, pictures, and more, make sure to join the more than 33,000 followers over at Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. Don't be left out. And last but definitely not least, it's what keeps the entire machine going. I'm talking about Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. We appreciate your support in helping us pay the bills to keep the WrestleCopia podcast network running and enabling us to continue to bring you all the quality programming that we offer.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling, the podcast that's based on the old school but can still help you find the good stuff from today. Jimmy Street and the Plastic Chic, Jared, are the undisputed tag team champions of the wrestling podcast world. From thought-provoking topics to superstar interviews to action figure expertise, this team does it all. And all they ask is, give me back my pro wrestling! Every other Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at USWApodcast.com.
Tired of the same boring wrestling podcast? Need something with attitude, chaos, and maybe just a little cussing? That's STSpod.club, and we got it all covered. We've got wrestling weirdness with WTF News Desk, 5-minute time limit, and the Southern fried brain of me, BT, steering the whole ship. We also have rolling into Memphis every week about the current Memphis wrestling. Interviews, hot takes, and wrestling outrageousness so wild it might get you banned in 12 states. That's right, it's SDSpod.club, or search all podcast catchers for Shooting the Shiznit, where wrestling podcasts grow chest hair. Not sure what that meant. Love my mama.
But yeah, what a great guy, Barry Horowitz. I've never got a chance to talk to him, but I've heard some of his interviews, and by all accounts from everybody I know says he's a good guy. But I've noticed that in recent years, that some guys will kind of try to vet you a bit, because you just imagine, I mean, my God, there's 10,000, and that might even be a conservative number, 10,000 wrestling podcasts out there today, and these guys have got literally probably got a dozen people hitting them up every day trying to do a podcast, and half of them are 20-something-year-old people that's never seen them wrestle, don't know anything about them. They just know that they're some kind of name, and might be a shot in the arm of their podcast if they had them on. And I've had several guys tell me, like, dude, I just want to make sure you're somebody that knows what you're doing and has a little bit of a, following or something, because, I get asked and then go on and find out that, this is somebody, that's got 4 followers and don't even know who I am, and now I'm stuck in a podcast with them for, however long they try to drag it out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's also guys that try to, because you're a wrestling podcast, or I don't do them for free. And I'm like, and I'm not saying that I feel bad saying, I don't want to pay them, but I've never paid for a guest. You know what I mean? No. I'm kind of, and it's no offense to anybody like that, guys that do get paid for it or to try to get paid for it. I've always, I've always conducted myself in a professional manner, and to try to be as friendly as possible, try to put out a very professional email or Facebook message, whatever you could say. And, a lot of times people just be like, all right, cool, man. Yeah, I'll do it. And, I have a bunch of guests lined up for the future. We're just having trouble setting up dates right now. But, you'd have to conduct yourself in a professional manner. Some people want to know your stats, your views, like your views, your how many followers you have, and all that other stuff. I'm able to provide that. I'm able to provide references. You know what I mean? Mario Mancini will put me over anytime I ask somebody, that he's a friend with, you know what I mean? Because me and Mario have become very close over the last 7 or so years. So
that's a huge thing, is people who will vouch for you or people that are associated with you, because I've talked to a ton of people over the years, and a lot of people know me from different things, but like once I started doing this weekly show with Doug and Tommy, I've had people come to me and go, "Hey,
that probably speaks volumes." Yeah, that speaks volumes with Doug and Tommy. I mean, the two wrestling legends.
Absolutely, and like I went with them to Philadelphia last year to that tri-state reunion show, and everybody just treated me like I was, one of the boys. Like, hey, it's Doug and Tommy's guy. Come on over here, and you find yourself in situations like, wow. You know the right people. you get brought right into the inner circle. So that's been really cool. But who's somebody that you got it in your head that, like, man, I want to talk to this person, and you set out seeking them out, getting in touch with them, and it was some work to get it done. But when you did get it done, you felt accomplished, and the interview was everything you hoped it would be.
That's kind of a tough question, really, because I've had so many people. I really, I tried to, like I said earlier, I talked to Brian Blair. All I did was send him an email. He was like probably the easiest guy and laid back guy to get on, but I didn't think Jumpin' Jim Brunzell was going to do the podcast at all, because I got a hold of his email, sent him an email, and I went in nervous as all hell. Because I'm just like, I just talked to Brian last year, it's this year, and I could not have met a friendlier person in this world. Like, seriously, I was really nervous going in. Every interview I'm nervous going into to some extent. You know what I mean? Last week when I interviewed Joe, like, I was extremely nervous because when I approached him, he asked me all these questions, like I said, stats and all that other stuff. And I said, this guy's just not going to do it. I could tell right away he's not going to do it. And then I messaged him the couple days before. And I was like, hey, are we good or we're not good? And he's like, oh, yeah, I was waiting for you to send me a link. Okay, I sent him the link. This is probably the most recent where I felt super nervous because I'm like, this guy doesn't seem like he's going to have a great conversation with me. He might not even like it. But it ended up being probably one of my favorite conversations that I ever had. because I thought he was funny. He was informative. His outlook on the world of professional wrestling as a guy that used to wrestle is very interesting, because some people hold on to stuff. And, when he was talking about how people win belts and all that other stuff, and he's just like, you don't win belts, you're giving them, and all that other stuff. It just kind of, that's a really, it's kind of an odd way to look at it in a way, because people hold on to stuff like that. I thought it was just a great episode, and it was probably like my most probably my most favorite episode, so that I've done in a long time.
I really enjoyed it, and I like interviews with guys like him who are completely removed from the business, so they don't have an agenda. They're not here to try to plug something or get themselves over. They're just here to talk openly and honestly about their career and the business in general. And he's one of those guys, like, I've seen matches of him, like when him and Dean were tag team partners and different things, but I had no inkling of his personality or anything like that beforehand. So like you said, he was funny, he was personable. Like, I really enjoyed the interview, and I came into it not knowing what to expect, or if I would even, if I was like, I don't know, man, this guy maybe deadpan like Dean's character was. Maybe this may not be
exactly
fun,
yeah.
Immediately, it was great stuff.
He was cracking jokes throughout the whole hour. It's just like, and I was, for that first, I was like, wait, was that a joke? With certain things, I'm like, certain things I didn't pick up right away, because he was so serious about the way he was joking. So.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I tell you another one that caught me off guard. And I didn't know he had done so many things in his life and had such a athletic background and everything, was Vladimir Koloff.
Bro,
that was a good interview.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, because that literally ranks very highly. And I think in my list of interviews that I've done over the years, and I think it's because he and I have really developed a really good friendship since. He calls me on the phone probably a couple times a week.
Cool.
And I'm going to actually go to New York to see him at the end of March. Him and Nikita are coming up to be the big event, and he has invited me up to come see, knowing that I'm pretty close. It's like an hour and a half drive from me. I had no idea how to find him at first, and of course, I very first saw him at the in South Atlantic Pro Wrestling, which is that became a very favorite promotion of mine, as well as like an oddball kind of territory that was kind of trying to hang on to something that, I think it's a great promotion. Frank Dusick worked there for a number of years, which after he left World Class and stuff. So I was going through the Wikipedia page, and it was listing everybody that had worked South Atlantic and their shoot names. And I just looked him up on Facebook, and basically I shot him a message. He didn't even respond to the message. He just called me right away to ask me, and it was like, how did you find my name? I said, Google, Wikipedia. It's that simple these days in 2025, so
you're not in the witness protection program, man.
but no, we had a really great conversation after that opening lines, so, and I was just like, why is he calling me? But yeah, we had a really great conversation after that, and he talked a lot about his career. Then we eventually arranged the time. It took a couple weeks to get done, because he's kind of a busy guy working where he is and stuff like that, and he's doing appearances. Now he's doing like tons of appearances, like all over, and it's just like, after being removed from the business for so many years, he's kind of back in it, doing all sorts of appearances, like all over the country now.
That's funny. Like, a lot of guys kind of did themselves a favor by just completely removing themselves for so many years, because now, like, conventions and virtual signings and all these things are such a big thing, and a lot of these guys have been doing them from day one, so they're popular. They have a lot of fans, but people are like, all right, I've met them like 5 times. I don't need to get back to that. But they're like, oh, Vladimir Koloff, I remember that dude. Where's he been? And there's this whole demand for him all of a sudden that probably wasn't 10 years ago. So it's pretty cool.
The funny part is there's so many people are like, I never even knew there was another Koloff. I'm like, there's way more than you think. You know what I mean? I said, people are trying to kind of discount its legitimacy. I said, you don't know the story. I said, I know the story. You know what I mean? He teamed with Ivan early on in South Atlantic, and Ivan took him around and gave him that name. People thought he was just kind of a rip-off Nikita, but that's not even the case. But, I mean, he looked a lot like him, but,
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw him in a magazine, I'm like, these clowns have mislabeled Nikita's picture. And then I looked a little closer. I'm like, no, wait a minute, that's not Nikita.
Yeah, right.
But I remember seeing him briefly on Abrams UWF, Smoky Mountain. Seen him tag with Ivan there.
Yeah, he worked Smoky Mountain. Yeah, I didn't even know he worked ECW until I was doing the research. I was like, huh. And I love those early ECW programs, the Eastern Championship Wrestling programs, because that's my wheelhouse, that kind of vibe. And so I went back and watched a lot of those episodes, and him and Ivan were teaming up there too. So I was like, that's crazy. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I don't know. There's people like that flew under the radar where people are like, what do they do? They didn't do nothing. And they're like, no, actually, dude, if you look at their resume, he did a lot of stuff. It just didn't happen where you were watching, apparently. So
yeah. Well, everybody just assumes WWF, WCW, now AEW. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't make it there. They didn't make it at all. You know what I mean? Kind of a thing.
But that's what I love about these interviews is you give a chance, and that was kind of always my intention in doing these things. Like, all right, I want to get some big interviews to get eyes on it to hook people in. But what I really want to do is give these guys like Vladimir Koloff a chance to come on here and tell their story and for somebody to learn about them and then do like I do most of the time. As things come up in the interview, I'm kind of scribbling it down on a notepad. And afterwards, I'll go look it up and watch some of their stuff. And, like, it's wild to discover a wrestler and suddenly become a fan of someone in 2026 from stuff that they did in the 90s that you just didn't see until now. But that happens every day. That's the beauty of the internet, dude. And you can appreciate this being a tape trader. And I tell people this all the time. Like, if you're a wrestling fan now, you don't know how lucky you are. Like, in our day, if I read about something or somebody's like, hey, did you see that angle they did in Portland where Billy Jack Haynes turned heel? I'm like, no. Well, I got to go on the tape trading sites, scour people's list, find it on a list of someone I trust who isn't going to screw me over or send me horrible quality stuff that I can't watch, and then wait 2 or 3 weeks for him to dub it and package it and send it, and it gets here. So if I decide today I want to see the Billy Jack heel turn in Portland, back then, best case scenario, it's probably 3 weeks before I get it in my hand, and then it's a crapshoot of if it's actually what I want to see or what I've traded for or paid for. Now,
right.
Half the things in the world that's ever happened, if you want to see it, it's probably on YouTube. And if it's not on YouTube, it's on Savoldi's or the Parsons. Somebody's got it somewhere, and you can watch it within moments. And you can get a sample of literally every territory just on YouTube alone. I mean, me personally, my channel has nearly going on 5,000 videos on it. I mean, there's something from damn near every territory. That's amazing. Like, to sit here and think that, like, for guys like me and you that used to have to work for tape trading, that I can go watch just about any angle I want to is, it was unfathomable, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, and now everything's at the tip of our fingers. You know what I mean? It's just amazing that there's so many streaming networks. I actually only subscribe to one now, but there was times where I had to have it all at first.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it's like, I subscribe to 2 actually. I lied, but I subscribe to this Foley network, and then the Parsons run the Classic Wrestling, which is, they haven't been updating as frequently, but I guess they're going to start again. So, but they're still running their social media, so they have some really good footage as well. But like I said, anything, and YouTube. You know what I mean? There's a lot of really good uploaders on YouTube that can provide the stuff that we appreciate, the wrestling that we like. And it's amazing. We don't have to keep up with whatever the hot indie is on IWTV or WWE or AEW if we don't want to. We have options, you know what I mean? We have way more options than we did when we were kids to be able to have access to a lot of this kind of footage.
And I feel like an old tape trader like us has suddenly taken over the WWE Vault YouTube channel, because now all of a sudden there's this obscure stuff that tape traders have wondered about for years is suddenly popping up just out of the blue on that channel now. Not like when the last Battle of Atlanta cage match showed up on the WWE Network, but still, like, that whole That little compilation of Fur Face, the Brutus Beefcake mask thing that a lot of people for years thought was like urban legend. Suddenly there's a compilation of that pops up one morning, and we're like, what the? Who went looking for this? You know, but it's fun. Because it's one of those things you always heard about.
Yeah,
there it is.
Yeah, I just saw clips of that on probably Facebook Reels or something like that, and I was just like, "This is the most craziest looking thing, the fur face thing," you know?
Yeah, and there's suddenly all these old Omni shows showing up.
Yeah, I saw there's actually some channel on YouTube that's popping up, like a bunch of like NWA house shows and stuff like that are popping up and stuff like that, and I was just like, holy crap, this channel, it's like stuff that I've only dreamed about watching back in the day, because I used to watch, you know, the shows, and they used to advertise all these shows, but I'm the way up north as opposed to down where they were running shows. And the NWA only came here twice in 1989 in New Haven. I didn't attend either of those shows, so you know, they let's see, what was I gonna say? They, you know, for some of these shows from the early to mid 80s, this is only stuff I could have, like, I wished that I could have watched, and now I get to watch some of this stuff that's popping up on YouTube. So it's kind of amazing, and most of them are like pro shot too, just no commentary, or sometimes somebody's adds commentary 20-30 years later, whatever it is, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I mean, and there was. You know, I kind of alluded to it a minute ago. Now, you used to kind of get burned sometimes. People would show up. Some new trader would show up and be like, oh, I've got this house show that everybody's always wanted to see. Or that last Battle of Atlanta thing. I mean, how many people burned people promising, hey, my neighbor was friends with Paul Ellering that had a tape in his basement, and I've got it. And he'd burn 30 people, then disappear, you know. But everybody would take that chance because, boy, we all wanted to see it.
I remember when it finally came out on the WWE Network. I was at work. I was in the office, and it came out. And the first thing I did when I got home was put that on. And I remember a lot of people reading about this on the internet. It's very disappointing.
Yeah.
So, because there was a lot of hype about it. And I was just like, oh, my God. I said, this is boring. I said, this is supposed to be like this big thing. And, you know, it just kind of got me.
Few things can live up to the hype. But,
so that's
good. That had been hype for, 20, 30 years. I mean, short of a decapitation, I don't know that it could have lived up to what everybody was expecting. But no, it didn't. And I asked Tommy about it one time. I said, so did you have people asking you about if you had a tape? He goes, oh, yeah. People would come up to me and, hey, have you got a tape of the cage match with you and Buzz? And like, no, I've never even seen it. And so it was about a few months after it came out that Tommy finally got to watch it. And that was the first time he had seen it since it happened. Of course, I didn't say, was it a letdown? But I'm sure even in his mind, having talked about it so much over the years and having so many fans come up to him at shows and conventions and tell their memories of it, I'm sure even in his head, it probably wasn't what he remembered it to be, because that's just human nature.
Yeah. Tommy, I got a chance to meet him probably about 5-6 years ago now. He did a signing locally up here in Connecticut. And I got to tell you, man, he was probably one of the nicest human beings I've ever met. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. I wore a Dusty Rhodes shirt to the thing, and he loved my shirt. And then that just kind of, I guess, we ended up sitting there having a great conversation for about a good 20 minutes or so.
He's such a great dude, man. Like, so me growing up, I'm 48, so, in the 80s, growing up, watching him, as one of my heroes, and, like Georgia and then Memphis and the heel turn, and I was 10 years old when they shaved Jerry Lawler's head in the famous cage match, and all that. And so being such a fan of his growing up, it's kind of surreal sometimes, like you're sitting there with your wife watching TV and your phone rings and you look down and it's Tommy Rich calling, It's like, what the hell's going on, man? Like, but he's such a nice guy. We're getting ready to start working on his book here pretty soon, and I'm pretty excited about
awesome.
it. That's gonna be a fun project, to say the least. So
that's awesome. Speaking of books, I got this right here with me, right here. This book that you wrote right here.
Hey,
I just got that. Yeah, I just got this recently, and a great job on the on that, by the way. And
Thank you.
I loved watching Eddie growing up as well.
I was such a huge fan of Eddie, and I actually started that book years ago, like 15 years ago, and then I went through a divorce and kind of shelved it and never came back to it. And then me and Doug got together a couple of years ago, and that's kind of that's what led to it. He had heard I had worked on a book, and so he reached out to me and asked, did I ever finish it? And I was like, no, I didn't. He's like, well, it's been on my brain to do one. Would you want to work together on it? And that led to us working on the book and starting. The podcast just started me and Doug, and then eventually Tommy joined, and it's spun out from there. But yeah, man, thank you so much, because I'm really proud of that book. I'm glad to be associated with Eddie and Doug and the whole Gilbert family. I was a big fan of him and Eddie and their dad. I got to work some shows with him in Mississippi back in '98. And he was just an absolute gentleman and wealth of knowledge. So very, very cool. Thank you for plugging that.
Of course,
I appreciate it.
Of course, it's a great read for anybody. I know we're on your podcast, so people probably know about it, but it's a great read. I really enjoyed it. As soon as I saw that there was a book coming out on Eddie, I was like, I gotta get that book. I said, there's no doubt about it. I'm buying that. And I don't always buy like a. I've been buying more books, but they're usually, like I said, like this kind of a thing, like historical knowledge that I could, you know what I mean? Because there's more than, than just watching the product. I want to know about people, about things, and studying that history. You know what I mean? Not everything is going to be on the internet necessarily.
That's true. Eddie was always so like ahead of the curve on everything in wrestling. He was kind of ahead of his time, and I've told Doug since me and him first started talking and doing this, I was like, dude, I feel like Eddie would have been at the forefront of wrestling podcast when that came along. I said, I think he would have had one of the first ones, and it would have been great because, knowing Eddie like he was, he'd have been working angles on there. There'd have been all kinds of wild stuff. So I hate we didn't get a chance to take part in that. But
right.
I got to mention this one before we wrap up soon.
Sure.
A guy who, I'm in Alabama. I grew up in Mississippi. I moved to Alabama 26 years ago and have lived here ever since. So this guy's a legend in Alabama, but he doesn't get a lot of love outside of Alabama. But, man, when it popped up, you had interviewed Dirty White Boy Jimmy Powell. I couldn't click on it fast enough. And what a great interview. I've started an Alabama Wrestling History Facebook group, and I'm kind of starting a project where I want to do a series of podcasts and some articles with different guys from over the years in Alabama. And eventually I want to make an Alabama wrestling history book, but I want to get all my ducks in a row and talk to everybody. And Jimmy's a big piece of that puzzle of somebody I want to talk to for sure. And so, man, his story of just, he's renting a ring when he's a teenager, just his story is a really amazing story. Man, thank you for getting him on there. You did a great job with that interview. Everybody should check it out.
That came about by accident. Roger Sartain hooked me up with Jimmy. I was, until probably a month before, I wasn't necessarily familiar with Jimmy Powell. However, I shouldn't say I wasn't familiar. I wasn't 100% familiar. I had seen I didn't put the connection together, but I had interviewed Roger. I guess they had worked together in a bunch of different places together. And, I had seen a video of him somewhere as well. And somehow Roger was talking about him during an interview and talking about, and me and Roger still keep in touch. I actually speak probably weekly. And he said Jimmy Powell would be a good interview, blah, blah, blah. And then I just started looking into his career. I watched the match, him and Brad Armstrong against each other. Now, Brad Armstrong's probably one of my all-time favorites as well. Yeah. A guy that I don't think gets nearly enough credit and these days. And I think he could have done bigger and better things, provided it was a different time period in professional wrestling. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But Jimmy, I contacted Jimmy, and, he got back to me, and I was just like, wow, okay, great. So, and then I just sat there, did my research, and I watched other interviews. I watched whatever I could find on YouTube, anything that I could scour on the internet. And I got to say that he is such a nice guy, I tell you. And his story is so amazing, seriously. And I didn't realize that he was the original Dirty White Boy, or,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so I think that's, I think that's probably when, I had to explain, like, no, this guy's the original Dirty White Boy. People are always thinking of Tony Anthony constantly, you know what I mean? So, but I'm just like, no, this guy's the original. It's like, he had the name first, and I learned so much about his career. I had no idea he had done so much, to be honest with you. Like, his career he had an amazing, amazing career.
And that's why I think shows like yours are so important, because I'm sure only a small percentage of wrestling fans know the name Jimmy Powell. And they hear Dirty White Boy and they think that's one of those Alabama guys that just took somebody's gimmick and ran with it. And so to have an opportunity to tell his story, and then when because I even learned stuff in the interview. I knew a good bit about him from watching a lot of his career and hearing other interviews, but I learned a lot in your interview with him that I didn't know, and that's what I love about him, because so many of these podcasts guys come into it and they don't have a conversation with people, as in they don't listen to what they're saying and then respond to what they say and have follow-up questions and dig deeper. They've just got a list of things they were going to ask them, kind of like an old Rob Feinstein sheet where it's like, what are your memories of this? And no matter what they say, they just go on to the next question. They don't dig into it. They don't follow up. And so that's what I like is, you'll dig down into a topic and hear everything they have to say about it. So I think that's what's important about shows like yours is people get a chance to really learn about these guys and find out, it's more than just a couple of blurbs that you saw on Wikipedia at some point. Some of these guys had some really amazing careers. Tell everybody where they can go and find your show and go through and listen to these interviews if they haven't yet.
You can just go to my YouTube channel, look up the Rick Del Santo on on YouTube, and you'll just find subscribe button. You'll see, go straight to. You'll be able to find all my list of interviews. You'll be able to find my random. Other random things. All my older podcasts are up there, so there's probably over 1,000 videos uploaded between. I've done over 400 podcast episodes between the couple name changes and stuff like that. And right now I don't have anything super lined up. I have some things in the works. I'm going to be talking to Todd Becker. I'm going to be talking to Keith Steinborn. And who, to me, he was, I've always enjoyed watching Keith through Georgia, through the NWA and stuff like that. We're just trying to get that lined up well. And I got Rod Price at some point is going to be a guest as well. We're talking about that. We're just trying to, he's a super, super busy guy. So we're trying to add it up and, add up the time. And I'm also only available a couple of days out of the week most of the time to do shows, so we're just trying to get our schedules to sync up. And but I just spoke to Rod the other day, so that's coming up as well. And right now I don't have anything like concrete for the new episode Monday yet, but my boy sometimes Anthony Brennan comes on and we'll do like some sort of retro review of something, or talk some old school stuff. Like one time we talked how important magazines were in the 1980s growing up when we were wrestling magazines. Last time we did a full episode on Learning the Ropes, the old sitcom, the NWA sitcom. Surprisingly, that got a really good views on that one somehow. I have no idea. But I was very shocked that number for recent episodes got more than like a lot of my interviews. I was like, wow. It's like, so, and that was a fun one. I enjoyed the show as a kid. I was a kid, but of course, going like we were talking about earlier, there was no bad wrestling when we were growing up. And once you go back and watch it, so that's definitely a product of that. So, we kind of missed the heyday of the AWA, like, because I got in it around like late 86, 87. Yeah.
And I liked the AWA enough until even when it got to like 89, even as a kid, I was like, woof, oh man.
I think, 89, there's kind of certain things about 89 I really enjoy, but once it got to like 1990, and when it was about to close down, you could definitely see the writing on a wall in a way. But you had like, that's when Nikita Koloff came out of retirement. He went to the AWA. He was wrestling Zbyszko. So I have a certain love for the last couple of years of AWA based on things like that. Harley Race came in and and wrestled at one point during that final stage. So I have a certain love for, the last couple of years of the AWA based on stuff like that. You know what I mean? But, they didn't really have, they really didn't want to go forward. You know what I mean? And change, evolve.
Yeah, well, yeah, 88, it started getting a little rough, and it kind of got rougher. And, I mean, I got 3 words for 1988. If anybody says 88 was a great year, Rocky Mountain Thunder. Man, it's been great talking to you, Rick. Keep doing what you're doing. I've looked forward to that Rod Price interview, Keith Steinborn. And those guys, man, they have great stories to tell, and they don't always have a place to tell it. So, man, just keep it up, man. I enjoy it, and anytime if I can ever help you out, I'm happy to plug it and do anything I can for you. Don't hesitate to hit me up, man.
Now that you said that, I'm going to harass you. Thank you.
Please do. All right, folks, Rick Del Santo, go check out his YouTube channel. He's got a ton of great interviews there, and hey, if it's somebody you don't know about, click on it, learn something about them. And there's a great interview there with Max Payne, somebody I'm going to be talking to here real soon. And so I enjoyed that one as well. So, all right, we'll talk to you soon, Rick. Take care, and we'll catch you back here for another episode of Retro Wrestling with Gene Jackson.